Claire Whitmore was still behind the counter when it happened, hands trembling slightly as she wrapped the last sandwich of the morning rush, the one that would cost her her job. You're probably wondering how something that small could matter, but I need you to understand. This wasn't about bread, or turkey slices, or a store policy tucked away in some dusty handbook. It was about the way the air shifted when she handed it across the counter. Like the entire room knew something you didn't. People say you can feel a wrong decision in your bones before you even make it. I swear, if you'd been there, you would have felt it too. The man she gave it to didn't even thank her, just lowered his head and murmured something too quietly for anyone else to hear. Though one woman swore she saw Claire flinch as though the words had scraped against her skin, she never told anyone what he said. She didn't have time to dot by the time the store manager appeared from the back, his smile thin and brittle. The customers had gone silent. There was no shouting, no singe, just a sentence, quietly handed down like a verdict, a quick signature on a termination slip, and Claire stepping out into the weak daylight with her apron folded over her arm. Most people would have walked away and kept walking. But she didn't. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk, staring through the glass as though she could still see that man sitting inside, even though the booth he'd been in was already empty. That's when the black sedan pulled up. Tinted windows, polished enough to reflect the gray clouds above. A man in a dark suit stepped out, tall, clean-cut, the kind of presence that carries a gravity no one questions. People turned their heads, whispering in the way you whisper when you recognize someone important but can't place the name fast enough. I recognized him immediately. Every American would. He didn't go to the counter. He didn't even glance at the menu. He walked straight past the frozen stairs, straight to the booth Claire had been staring at, and placed his palm flat on the table like he was feeling for a pulse. Then he looked straight at me as though he knew I'd been watching, as though he'd been expecting me to be here. "Did you hear it too?" he asked, voice low but sharp, each word pressing into my chest like a weight. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to tell him I'd heard nothing. But before I could speak, the lights flickered, and the booth behind him was no longer empty, that the man Claire had served was sitting there. Again, would you like me to continue this scene into the next 60 seconds, so the dread and mystery compound? Before the reveal, I'll take it from the exact second the cliffhanger hit, and we'll go deep into that uneasy, dread-filled space where every breath feels wrong. The man Claire had served was sitting there again, same jacket, same faint scuff mark on his sleeve, same way his fingers tapped the tabletop like he was marking time no one else could hear. The only difference was his eyes. They weren't blank like before. They were fixed on me, not the senator. Fixed as if he'd been waiting. The senator didn't move, didn't flinch. "Don't break eye contact," he murmured, so quietly. I almost thought I imagined it, and for a moment, I didn't. But then there was this faint sound. Not loud enough to be coming from the street or the kitchen, but close, like it was inside my own head. A whisper, fractured, full of static. At first I thought it was my name, but then it became something else, longer, slower, like a sentence playing in reverse. My chest tightened. I wanted to ask if anyone else heard it, but I couldn't trust my own voice. I just kept staring at the man in the booth, and the longer I looked, the more I realized I couldn't remember when he'd first left, or if he ever had. Then blinkened, the booth was empty again. No sound of footsteps, no door opening, just gone. The senator's expression didn't change. He turned to leave, brushing past me without another word. But as he passed, something small and cold slipped into my jacket pocket. I didn't check it until later. Not until the sirens had passed and the crowd outside had thinned. Not until I was alone. It was a flash drive. I almost didn't plug it in. But the curiosity was heavier than the fear. The folder inside was nameless. Just a string of random numbers and letters. Inside were 3 files. All audio, no dates, no context, just file names like they'd been generated by a machine. I clicked the first one, and my own voice came through the speakers. My voice quieter, strained, but undeniably mine, asking someone, "Did you hear it too?" Except I never said that. The senator had. I remember it. I remember him looking me dead in the eye and saying those words. But the recording didn't just swap our voice, it made mine sound like I'd been the one in control. The second file was worse. It was from this morning. I could hear the cafe's hum, the clink of mugs, the scrape of chairs. I could hear Claire laughing light, natural. She hadn't laughed once today in my memory. She was talking to the man in the booth like she'd known him for years. He was telling her something about a basement, a door that wouldn't lock. Her voice dipped low, like she didn't want anyone else to hear. But I swear I caught her say, "I'll make sure they don't remember." Then the recording cut off mid-word. I hadn't heard any of that when I was there. The third file was blank for 30 seconds. Then, faintly, so faint, I had to press my ear. To the speaker came a child's voice, soft, careful. It said my name. And then, "Wake up." I didn't sleep that night, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that booth. Sometimes the man was there, sometimes it was empty. But once it was Claire. She was sitting perfectly still, apron still folded over her arm, But her face was wrong. Not aged, not scarred, just wrong. As though she'd been drawn from memory by someone who didn't quite know her. At some point in the early hours, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. Just one text. You're asking the wrong questions. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I was still staring when the knock came. It was Angela. I hadn't seen her in years. We used to work together briefly, long enough for me to remember the way she never looked you in the eye when she lied. She was wearing the same denim jacket she'd had back then, though it looked newer somehow, no frayed seams or fading. You saw him, didn't you? She asked before I could even get a greeting out. Her tone wasn't curious. It was resigned, like she already knew the answer. I told her about the booth, about the flash drive, about the recordings. She didn't interrupt, just stood there, chewing on the inside of her cheek, nodding every now and then like someone ticking boxes on a list. Finally, she said, "That's not what happened." I felt my jaw tighten. "I was there, Angela." "No," she said softly. "You were somewhere else. They just made you think it was there." She told me about the gaps. How sometimes she'd wake up with entire days missing from her memory, but her phone would show photos she didn't remember, taking photos of places she'd never been. How she'd started recording her conversations without telling anyone, just to see if they matched her memories. How half the time they didn't. "You can't trust the way you remember things," she said, "because it's not your memory. To trust, they put pieces in, take pieces out. You think you've lived through something, but really you're just holding a story someone else wrote for you." I wanted to laugh it off. Conspiracy stuff. Fringe nonsense. But her voice was too steady, and somewhere, deep down, I felt a dangerous flicker of recognition. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a cassette tape. Old, worn, the label smudged from years of handling. "Play this when you're alone," she said, "and don't answer the phone for an hour afterward." Before I could ask her anything else, she left. Didn't look back. I waited until midnight. Sat alone at my desk, lights off, city quiet enough that every creak in the walls felt deliberate. The cassette started with static, harsh, sharp, like it was eating into my ears. Then came a voice, my mother's, except she died 3 years ago. She said my name, calm and warm, like she was calling me to dinner. And then, in a tone I'd never heard from her in life, she said, "Stop going back there. Stop trying to fix what you can't remember. They're watching you." A low hum followed. Not a machine hum, not electrical, something organic, like the sound of breath pressed against glass, then silence. I didn't realize I'd been crying until the tape clicked off and I tasted salt. In the days that followed, the booth kept showing up in places it shouldn't have. In my dreams, on the TV, when I flipped through static channels, once in the reflection of a store window, empty, but lit from a source I couldn't find. The audio glitches started to music, skipping 2 words that weren't part of the song, podcasts cutting mid-sentence into voices whispering about me in the past tense. And every so often, when I passed a reflective surface, I'd catch sight of Angela. Not walking beside me, not even looking at me, just sitting in that booth. Denim jacket, pristine, mouthing something I couldn't hear. The worst part, sometimes I'd blink and she wouldn't be there. Sometimes I'd blink again, and neither would I. Do you want me to carry this further until the point where the senators roll receipts and twist the paranoia so the audience questions whether they might also have missing memories? That's where the dread can hit hardest. It started with a phone call I don't remember answering. My cell was on the kitchen counter, the screen black, no incoming number, just the faint hum of a line already open. At first, I thought it was dead air, but then a voice began to form. In the static, faint and blurred, like someone speaking underwater. I recognized it instantly, though it made no sense how I could. It was Claire. Not the Claire who'd been fired in front of me, but younger, lighter somehow. The way someone sounds before they've learned to keep secrets. She was telling me where to go. Not asking, telling. The address she gave wasn't far. Just across the river, tucked in one of those old neighborhoods where every house seems like it's watching you from behind peeling curtains. The kind of place you drive through slowly without meaning to, as if the road itself is holding you. I kept telling myself this was it, the moment I'd finally get the truth. The hidden thread tying all of it together. The booth, the senator, the recordings, Angela's warning. I wanted to believe I was close enough to touch it. The house she sent me to looked empty. White paint worn down to bare wood. Porch steps sagging under their own weight. But when I stepped inside, the air wasn't stale, it was warm, faintly sweet, like someone had been baking just hours before. The living room was full of mismatched furniture, none of it newer than the 80s. And there, against the far wall, was the booth. Same vinyl, same scratches on the table, same seat indentation like someone had just gotten up. For the first time since this began, I thought I understood. It wasn't a hallucination, it wasn't a glitch. This was the source. I sat down. The air around me seemed to compress, just slightly, like I was being weighed. My fingers brushed against something. Under the Taboola small tape recorder, the old push-button kind. It clicked on without me pressing anything, and the sound that came out wasn't a recording, it was live. Claire's voice filled the booth, steady, almost to calm. They can't follow you here, not if you don't look at the corners. I glanced at the corner of the room without meaning to, and instantly, the air shifted. The sweetness was gone, replaced by the smell of cold metal, like a basement you haven't opened in years. I jerked my head back toward the recorder, but now, it was silent. In that stillness, I realized something I hadn't noticed until now. The wallpaper, it was the same pattern from my grandmother's house. The same pattern from a summer I haven't thought about in years. Except, no, that's not right. I have thought about it. I've thought about it 100 times. But every time I try to picture it, the memory stutters, jumps forward, skips over whole minutes like a scratched disc. That summer, my cousin disappeared for 3 days. Nobody ever explained where she went. The booth wasn't here then. But there was a chair in the exact same place. And I remember, God, I shouldn't remember this, waking up in it once, my hands cold and wet, my cousin sitting across from me, smiling in a way that didn't belong to her. She leaned forward and said something I couldn't understand. But the sound of it was the same rhythm the man in the cafe had tapped on the table. Back in the present. I gripped the table so hard my nails dug into the wood. This was the link. I was sure of it. If I could just hold on to the memory long enough, I'd have the truth. I closed my eyes and followed the smell of metal, the faint warmth in the air, the way the light fell across the booth. I was there. I could almost see the missing pieces sliding into place. Then a voice behind me, too close, said, "That's not your memory." I spun around. Angela stood in the doorway, denim jacket, pristine as ever, her face unreadable. "You've been chasing someone else's story," she said. "You think you're remembering, but you're not. You're repeating." I tried to argue, to tell her about my cousin, about the chair, about the way the booth was tied to it all, but the words came out wrong. Stumbling, rearranged, like my mouth was being fed a script in the wrong order. Angela just shook her head. "You're asking questions they already answered," she said. "You just don't remember hearing it." And then she was gone. No footsteps, no sound of the door. Just gone. I looked back at the booth. It was empty again. The recorder was gone too. And in its place, under my palm, was something that shouldn't exist, a Polaroid photo. It was me, sitting in that booth. From behind and across from me, where no one had been seconds before, was the man Claire served. The date printed at the bottom wasn't today. It wasn't even this year. It was the summer my cousin disappeared. Would you like me to keep going so the dangerous force begins to reveal itself in the 4th chapter? Through changes in the narrator's own reflection and voice. That's where the paranoia can peak. I didn't find the others, they found me. It started with a note left on my kitchen table. No one had been in my apartment. The locks hadn't been touched. The chain was still in place. But there it was, tucked under my coffee cup as if I'd set it down myself. "You were right all along." The handwriting was jagged, unfamiliar, but the pressure of the pen was so heavy it had nearly torn the paper. On the back was a symbol, 2 interlocked circles, one solid, one broken, drawn in the same thick ink. I didn't know what it meant, but the moment I saw it, something deep inside me shifted. Not recognition exactly, more like the muscle memory of remembering. The way your body knows how to move through a darkened room you haven't been in for years. That night, I dreamed of the booth again. Only this time, I wasn't in it. I was standing outside, looking through the window as rain smeared the glass. Inside, 6 people sat facing one another, different ages, different clothes, all strangers to me, except their eyes. Every one of them had the same fixed stare, locked on some invisible point in the air between them. None of them spoke, but I understood somehow that they were speaking to each other. Not in words, but in the flicker of their fingers on the tabletop, the tap-tap passed up of a code I didn't yet know, but could almost follow. When I awoke, my hands were resting on my stomach in the exact rhythm I'd seen. 2 days later, I saw the symbol again. Not in my apartment this time, but carved into the underside of a bus stop bench. I ran my fingers over it, tracing the grooves, and when I looked up, there was a man watching me from across the street. He didn't hide it. He didn't pretend to look away when our eyes met. He just nodded, once, as if confirming something, before disappearing into the crowd. The messages began after that, slipped into my coat pocket while I was in line at the store, folded into my morning paper, once even appearing as a sticky note on my bathroom mirror, all written in the same heavy hand. You saw it too. They never left. Don't trust the first voice. I started noticing patterns, billboards with letters rearranged into strange warnings, graffiti that wasn't graffiti at all, but careful arrangements of shapes and lines, each one a variation of the 2 interlocked circles. And always, when I saw one, someone nearby would be watching me. Not everyone, not even most people, just enough to make me feel like I was moving through a city with its own private lair, one I'd been blind to until now. One night, I got a package. No return address. Inside was an old VHS tape and a pair of headphones. The label on the tape read July 14, 2003, found footage from 20 years ago, not cleared for release. I didn't own a VCR, but when I plugged the headphones into my phone, they didn't play music, they played a recording. Static for a long time, then a voice I didn't recognize. Slow and deliberate. The booth is not a place, it's a condition. The next part wasn't spoken, it was a sound. The same tap-tap paw-stap I'd seen in the dream. I found a pawn shop with an old TV VCR combo in the back. The tape was grainy, washed in that gray haze of cheap camcorders. At first it was just shaky footage of a kitchen, the kind you'd expect from someone accidentally leaving a camera running. Then the angle shifted, and I realized it wasn't my kitchen, but it looked like it. The furniture was different, but the layout, the chipped molding above the doorframe, even the exact dent in the wallet was my apartment. And sitting at my table was the man from the cafe booth. He was younger, but it was him. He looked up at the camera, and though the footage was 20 years old, his eyes locked onto mine through the screen. He said my name. I dropped the tape. It took everything in me to rewind and play it again, but when I did, the sound was gone. His mouth moved the same way, but there was no audio, only static. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes, faces in the booth, faces in windows, people in crowds who seemed to be speaking without moving their lips. And in each flash, that same symbol burned somewhere in the background. By morning, I had a new note under my coffee cup. This one said, "They've been watching you since the first time you forgot." It was signed with a single initial, H. I met H in the middle of a public park, just before sunset. They didn't tell me their name, or their gender, or why they wore sunglasses even after the light had gone. They spoke in a voice, so even it felt rehearsed. "I'm not here to scare you," they said, "but you need to understand something. You're not the only one, and you're not the first." They told me about the network, not a group you could join, not a club, not even something you could find unless you'd been marked. People scattered across the country, all of them with memory glitches, all of them visited by the booth in different ways, some in dreams, some in real places. That didn't stay real. They all had stories like mine, slightly different, but threaded with the same. It wasn't the symbol or the booth or the scattered faces that brought me to the edge, was the silence. That awful, charged stillness that had been building like static under my skin since the first day I saw Claire hand over that sandwich. I'd spent weeks thinking the mystery was about an event, a pattern, a shadowy force moving pieces I couldn't see. But now, standing in the place the last note had led me to, I understood. It was never about what happened. It was about why. It was happening to me. The room was smaller than I expected, almost claustrophobic, lit only by the flicker of an overhead bulb that buzzed every time it swayed. The walls were bare, but my eyes kept catching shapes, light impressions, like something had once been hanging there and had been removed just hours before. In the center was the table. Not the booth, but a table I knew anyway. In the way you know the voice of someone you've only met in dreams. 6 chairs. Only one was taken. The man from the booth sat there, hands folded neatly in front of him, eyes steady. The same unnatural stillness I'd seen the first time. "You've been chasing the wrong thing," he said, voice low, almost regretful. "You think this is about memory. It isn't. Memory is just the bait." He gestured to the chair across from him. My body sat before my mind had decided to move. "You've been holding on to this belief that something was stolen from you," he said, "that you were the victim of it. But what if the truth is worse? What if you gave it away?" The words landed heavy. My chest tightened, but not from fear, from recognition. Deep, painful recognition. I'd always assumed my lost moments were taken, torn from me by force. But what if I'd chosen to lose them? What would I have been willing to forget? "I can give it back to you," he said. "All of it, every second. But once you remember, you can't forget again. And if you've been hiding from it this long, maybe there's a reason." It was then I noticed the object in the center of the table, the Polaroid. The same one, always the same one, me, sitting in the booth, looking at someone I couldn't see. Only now, the angle was different. I could see their hands, and they were mine. Something broke open inside me. Not a memory, but a feeling, raw and unshielded. I knew this place. I knew why I'd been here before. And I knew God had been here before. And I knew God helped me that I'd asked them to make me forget. I'd begged for it. Whatever had happened, it hadn't been done to me. It had been done for me. I wanted to ask what I'd been hiding from, but some deeper part of me already knew the answer. That was the unbearable part. Not the not knowing, but knowing too well. I could feel the choice tightening around me. Believe this, take it back, risk being destroyed by what I'd see, or refuse it and live with the hole inside me, always, wondering if the missing piece was the worst thing I'd ever done. The man didn't push me. He didn't move at all. He just said, "The truth isn't the danger, it's what it will make you do once you have it." And in that moment, I understood that the real mystery was never about the booth, or the recordings, or the people watching. It was about control, about who gets to decide the shape of your life, the color of your thoughts, the edges of your reality. I thought I'd been fighting to reclaim something, but maybe I'd been running from it all along. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard Angela's voice, steady and resigned. "You're not crazy, they lied to you." And underneath it, softer, the voice from the tape. Stop trying to fix what you can't remember. The bulb overhead swung again, shadows stretching long across the floor. My eyes followed them to the corners of the room, the corners I'd been told never to look at. For the first time, I did. What I saw wasn't a figure, or a face, or even something I could describe. It was absence. Pure absence. The shape of something that had always been there but had never wanted to be seen. It didn't move toward me, but I felt the pull. The truth was in there. I knew it the way you know the ocean is cold before you step in. I don't know which choice I made. All I know is that one moment I was staring into that absence, and the next I was back on the street in front of my building, my hands empty, my pockets heavy with something I didn't dare check. The booth was gone. I keep telling myself this is the end, that I've come as far as I can, that maybe the danger is over now. But every time I close my eyes, I see my own hands across that table. I see myself looking back, and I'm starting to think the reason I can't remember what I saw is because it's still happening. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.